August 2nd, 216 BC. The sun rises over the dusty plains of Apulia in southern Italy, revealing absolute carnage. A hot wind called the Volturnus sweeps across the battlefield, stirring clouds of dust and carrying the metallic smell of blood across the Aufidus River. What lies here will haunt military minds for the next 2,000 years. This is the day the Roman Republic faces total destruction, and the day a Carthaginian general accomplishes the impossible. This isn't just a defeat. This is the complete annihilation of the greatest army Rome has ever assembled. In a single afternoon, 70,000 men are erased from existence. But the road to this slaughter didn't start here. It began years earlier in the bitter rivalry between Rome and Carthage, two superpowers fighting for control of the Mediterranean world. Hannibal Barca had already achieved the unthinkable. He crossed the Alps with elephants and descended into Italy like a lightning strike. He defeated Roman legions at the Trebia River and trapped them in fog at Lake Trasimene. Yet Rome wasn't a power that accepted defeat. In 216 BC, the Roman Senate decided enough was enough. No more chasing Hannibal around Italy. They would crush him with overwhelming force. Rome raised an army of unprecedented size, 8 legions plus an equal number of allied troops, 86,000 men in total. This force was designed to be unstoppable, a hammer meant to shatter the Carthaginian threat once and for all. Commanding this massive force were 2 consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. They represented 2 sides of Rome itself. Paulus was cautious and calculating. Varro was aggressive and hungry for glory. History often blames Varro for the disaster that followed, but the tragedy of Cannae was born from collective Roman arrogance. They believed war was simple mathematics. The bigger army must win. It was that straightforward. On that sweltering August morning, they marched their massive infantry columns onto a narrow plain squeezed between the river and the hills. They packed their ranks deep and tight. The strategy was brutally simple. Punch straight through the center of the Carthaginian line like a battering ram. Opposing them stood Hannibal with 50,000 men. He was outnumbered, deep in enemy territory, with no hope of reinforcements. Any lesser commander would have retreated or taken a defensive position on high ground. Hannibal did neither. He understood the Roman mind better than the Romans understood themselves. He knew they would seek a direct confrontation, and he was prepared to give them exactly what they wanted, but on his own terms. He arranged his infantry not in a straight line, but in a crescent shape that bulged outward toward the Roman advance. This formation was an act of supreme military gambling. In the center, Hannibal placed his weakest troops, Gallic and Spanish swordsmen. On the flanks, he positioned his elite African infantry, veterans held back and hidden from the immediate focus of the Roman charge. On the far left and right, he stationed his superior cavalry. Hannibal's plan required his center to fail. It required his men to bleed and retreat, but not to break entirely. It was a strategy demanding absolute psychological control over a chaotic battlefield. He needed perfect discipline from men being slaughtered. The battle opens with skirmishers trading missiles, the clash of light infantry. But the real horror begins when the main Roman column crashes into the Carthaginian center. The impact is earth-shattering. The Roman legions are a machine of discipline and violence, and they push forward with unstoppable force. The Gallic and Spanish troops in Hannibal's center buckle under the immense pressure. They fight, they die, and slowly they step backward. To the Roman commanders watching from behind the lines, this looks like victory. The center is collapsing. The enemy is retreating. The consuls order more men into the gap to accelerate the breakthrough. Thousands of Roman soldiers press forward into the bending line. They're drawn into the vacuum like water rushing down a drain. The Roman formation becomes compressed. The deeper they push, the more cramped they become. They're so eager to deliver the final blow that they don't notice the shape of the battle changing around them. The outward bulging crescent of Hannibal's line has flattened. Now it begins to curve inward. The Romans are no longer pushing a line back. They're marching into a bag. While the infantry struggle in choking dust clouds, the cavalry battle on the wings decides the fate of the entire engagement. On the left, Carthaginian heavy cavalry led by Hasdrubal smashes through the Roman horsemen. Here's where something extraordinary happens. They don't pursue the fleeing survivors for miles, as was common in ancient warfare. Instead, they display a discipline that's terrifying in its precision. They regroup and gallop behind the entire Roman army to strike the allied cavalry on the other wing from the rear. The Roman cavalry is swept from the field completely. Now the legions are blind and exposed on their flanks. The trap is ready to snap shut. The Roman infantry has pushed so deep that the African veterans on Hannibal's flanks are now perfectly positioned on their sides. At a signal, the African infantry wheels inward. They turn 90 degrees and attack the exposed flanks of the Roman formation. Simultaneously, the Carthaginian cavalry returns from chasing the Roman horsemen and slams into the rear of the legions. The noise of battle changes instantly. The roar of the Roman advance turns into stifled cries of panic. 80,000 men are now surrounded in a kill box that grows smaller by the minute. The compression is so intense that men cannot raise their arms to strike with their swords. They're pressed chest to back, shoulder to shoulder, in a terrifying crush of humanity. The dust is so thick it chokes them. The heat is unbearable. This is no longer a battle. It's an industrial execution. The Carthaginians work their way inward from the edges, hacking at the helpless mass of Romans. The outer ranks fall, and the inner ranks can only wait their turn to die. There's no escape, no room to maneuver. The Roman superiority in numbers has become their death sentence. Their strength has been turned against them, creating a prison of flesh and bone. The slaughter continues for hours. The sun beats down on exhausted killers and terrified victims. Ancient sources claim that some Romans dig holes in the ground and bury their heads to suffocate themselves rather than wait for the sword. Consul Paulus is found dying, slumped against a rock. When offered a horse to escape, he refuses. He chooses to die with his men rather than face the Senate after such a catastrophe. Varro, however, escapes to carry news of the apocalypse back to Rome. By the time the sun sets, the Roman army has ceased to exist. The numbers are staggering, almost impossible to visualize. Between 50 and 70,000 Romans lie dead in an area of just a few square kilometers. Among the dead are 80 senators and 29 military tribunes. The flower of the Roman aristocracy has been cut down in a single day. It's a decapitation of the Roman state. Hannibal has lost roughly 6,000 men. The disparity in casualties is unprecedented in the history of warfare. The aftermath of Cannae is a landscape of horror. The historian Livy describes the scene the next morning as shocking even to the victors. The Carthaginians strip the bodies of armor and weapons. They collect hundreds of gold rings from the fingers of fallen Roman knights. These rings will later be poured onto the floor of the Carthaginian Senate as proof of the victory. It's a heap of gold representing the severed hand of Rome's ruling class. So why didn't Rome fall? In the days following the battle, the road to Rome lay wide open. Hannibal's cavalry commander, Hannibal, urged him to march on the city immediately. He famously said they could dine in the capital within 5 days. But Hannibal hesitated. He judged that his army was too exhausted and lacked the siege equipment to take the massive walls of Rome. He hoped that the Italian allies of Rome would defect, that the Republic would sue for peace. Hannibal's reply echoes through history. You know how to gain a victory, Hannibal, but you do not know how to use it. This moment of hesitation allows the Republic to breathe. In Rome, panic flares but is quickly suppressed by the iron will of the Senate. They ban the word peace. They limit mourning periods. They lower the age of recruitment and even arm slaves to rebuild the legions. Cannae doesn't break Rome. It hardens it. The defeat strips away the arrogance and replaces it with cold, ruthless determination to survive at any cost. The legacy of Cannae extends far beyond the ancient world. It becomes the gold standard of military perfection. For 2,000 years, generals study the maps of Apulia and dream of replicating the double envelopment. From Frederick the Great to the German general staff in 1914, the ghost of Cannae influences military doctrine. It represents the ultimate victory of intellect over brute force. Yet the true lesson of Cannae is perhaps not military, but psychological. It demonstrates the fragility of power. In the morning, Rome was master of Italy with the largest army in its history. By sunset, it was a trembling city on the verge of extinction. The battle serves as an eternal reminder that overconfidence is the prelude to destruction. As twilight settles over the field of Cannae, silence returns. The dust settles on mounds of the dead. The Aufidus River flows red to the sea. The screams of the dying have faded, but the shockwave of this day will reshape the Mediterranean world forever. The Republic will rise from these ashes not as a mere regional power, but as a ruthless empire forged in the trauma of near annihilation. Hannibal Barca has won his greatest victory, but in winning this battle, he may have lost the war. Rome will never forget. Rome will never forgive. And Rome will never, ever stop.